todos, Lógica les da la bienvenida al evento Visualización de Información. Agradecemos a todos su asistencia y su participación activa durante el evento. La visualización de información permite hoy en día a las compañías entender, comunicar y tomar decisiones acerca de las redes de valor. Las nuevas técnicas de virtualización y visualización están habilitando las posibilidades del entendimiento y comunicación acerca del trabajo dinámico en las redes de distribución. Bonanni es profesor de Sostenibilidad y Resiliencia en Columbia y el MIT, es PhD del MIT Media Lab, inventor, diseñador y artista de profesión. Démosle la bienvenida.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Apologies for doing this in English. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Lógica. My number one job is the founder and CEO of Sourcemap, which is a company that started 3 years ago from the MIT Media Lab. And it was the first company to use social media and the cloud to visualize supply chains. And I'll tell you why over the course of this talk. Okay, so supply chains. So I became extremely interested in supply chains about 6 years ago when we were looking for big problems for new media to solve. And supply chains are actually one of the biggest complex networks in the world, if not the most complex network in the world. This is just an example of one automotive distribution supply chain globally depicted, but they're so dense you can't see the world. Why are supply chains complicated? So, if you think of them in terms of a social network of companies, supply chains are huge. The smallest company, little tiny store, actually has a supply chain with thousands of suppliers. This is just upstream. And if you go into bigger and more complex industries, supply chains just get more complicated. So imagine that your friends on your Facebook account might be 500 or 5,000. Or imagine that your Twitter followers could be 500,000. It's not uncommon for a food company to have millions of farmers feeding into its supply chain. But these supply chains were created a long time ago using software that was based on servers installed in factories. And so the software and the servers were completely inadequate to deal with these millions of people in the supply chain. And the result is many companies operate very well to manage their purchasing and manage their distribution, but they're almost incapable of knowing about all of the suppliers upstream and all of the vendors, customers downstream. But fortunately, we had no idea what a supply chain was when we started this project. So we were just making drawings, and drawings like this one. And at the Media Lab, when I was still doing research, these drawings were attracting a lot of attention from manufacturers, and we thought, well, that's strange. How come manufacturers are interested? And then we discovered that huge problems were happening all over the world every day, and companies were scrambling to find out how could they be affected, were they affected. So when the tsunami hit Japan, it interrupted hundreds of factories. Those factories were suppliers into the electronics and the automobile industry, but it took weeks for companies like General Motors in the US or Volkswagen in Germany to realize that they were relying on companies in Japan that had been destroyed. Weeks during which they kept running the company as usual, and then the parts stopped arriving, and they spent days and weeks trying to start production again. So you have huge companies buying from huge companies with no visibility into where products are coming from. This happens all the time. Floods in Thailand 3 years ago stopped the entire global production of computer hard drives. The reason you have solid-state drives in your iPad is mostly because of the flood in Thailand. It decimated the market because every company was using the same location to make hard drives, but they didn't know. Of course, you know about problems that have to do with social risks in factories, problems that faced Samsung just last week, but Apple was famous. We see commodity problems where there are political conflicts happening somewhere in the world that are affecting candy companies. In short, no one is immune from problems related to having a lack of visibility. New York City ran out of gasoline for 9 days after the storm hit in 2012. 9 days without gasoline in a city as big as New York City. It's the same size as Bogota. Imagine police, ambulance, repair vehicles with no gasoline for 9 days. So nobody's immune. Nobody has visibility. Luckily, we had no idea what we were doing when we started Sourcemap, and that's why we started drawing supply chains in the cloud. We decided supply chains are complex, but new technology is much more powerful. So while it's hard for you to keep track of more than a few hundred contacts, it's very easy for a social network to keep track of each individual's contacts, connect them together, and link hundreds of millions of people in real time all around the world. And so we said, okay, let's start with this assumption that supply chains are really the biggest social network in the world. If you look at every product, everybody who grows in the farm, everybody who works in the factory, everybody who buys it, probably everyone on Earth is connected through a supply chain. And that means you have a 7 billion person social network through physical goods. If we could use social media to connect these stakeholders, if everybody knows who they buy from and who they sell to, we could map the entire world's supply chains. That's still the dream of Sourcemap. So we're not making drawings for visualization, we're making drawings to transform the way business is run, to make companies much more accountable for the global impact. 2007, we released the first version of Sourcemap. We said, everyone in the world should have the right to know where every product comes from. And so we used the cloud, we used technologies like Google Maps, we used visualization, very simple visualization. So you could take a product and understand where the mines are, where the farms are, where the factories are, where the distribution is, and where the customers are. And we made these visual demonstrations to show our sponsors, and then they became our customers. We said, look how easy it is. With modern technology, you can see where every factory is located. You can even see where every mine is located. In fact, the mines are so big, you can see them from sky. And they said, okay, what do we do with that? So we were still thinking very innocently. So we said, well, you could measure the carbon footprint. You could measure the life cycle impact of a product. So this is an example where you see a visual depiction, very simple, of a complex system. One product is sourced in one country, and its own footprint, and then it's transported by its own means. Another product is sourced in another country by its own footprint and then transported. We said, okay, so if you have this visualization, you have it on the web, imagine everyone in the world contributing data about products, and then you could make a choice as a consumer of which product is more sustainable. And you could even play around. You could move countries, you could move factories and see, okay, is this better, is this worse? These are things that you could only do because we had a visualization that was made for the web. And probably the most powerful part was when we, companies said, well, how do we get this data? How can we collect so much data? It's impossible. Because they're thinking they're going to install enterprise software in every country in the world and connect them all through internet. But no, we said, look, everybody has a cell phone. The poorest cotton farmer in India has a cell phone. Just by inviting all the people in your supply chain to contribute data, you can crowdsource to get a picture, so you can trace something from all of the small farms at one end of the chain, all the way through to the manufacturers and the producers at the other end. And ultimately, we were still thinking this was just for the public. So what happened? We released this tool. It's a very strange social media tool, right? You can map a supply chain. Do you think anybody would use such a tool? I didn't think so. So we had a lot of surprises. The first surprise was the first purpose of visualization is communication. And what's really amazing about visualizing something as complex as a supply chain is all of a sudden people who never knew what a supply chain was. This was 2007, 2008. It wasn't normal to talk about supply chain. Could all of a sudden see it. And this was really powerful. So we had made a website, and companies started to register and show their sourcing. especially food companies. Food companies sell a product, consumers want to know where the food comes from. And so for the first time, you have companies like Chiquita showing where the farms are, why they chose these farms, adding a description, showing where the processing is, showing where the distribution is. They basically say, look, we care about our supply chain, and we're proud of it, and we want you to see it too. So this is data that people were just putting on the web, and they could even share the data on social media networks. So it was a very strange software. It's the opposite of enterprise software. Instead of hiding supply chain software data, or publishing supply chain data. But what you saw there, that map, it just looks like a pretty map. It's actually a very powerful network model. When you think what happened in Japan, the tsunami, really what happened is something happened one place in the world, and then 2 weeks later something happened in the factories downstream. But nobody had ever drawn the connection between the two. Okay. And this was the first time that we had a tool that could draw these connections as they happened. So actually, when you draw that map on the globe, it's very confusing. Everything is all folded up. But when you unfold that map, it's very elegant. You can take data that companies already have, and you can find out exactly which factories, which suppliers, which distribution centers, which sub-suppliers, which customers are connected. So this is the big social network of manufacturing. And this is the first thing that companies really wanted. They wanted the map, sure. They want to know where their suppliers are. But more important than where their suppliers, they want to know if that supplier has a problem, who's going to be affected. And they want to know instantly. They don't want to wait 2 weeks to find out. So this was completely transforming the way they were storing data about purchasing and sales into one single social network from end to end. And so that was the first thing we did, was the visualization hides a very, very elegant model of relationships between companies. The other thing that most people don't realize is that you shouldn't have to generate visualizations. Visualizations should generate themselves. Okay? If you have to send information to PowerPoint and then make a graph and then email it to your boss, then the next day when the tsunami hits, you have to do that whole thing all over again. So the real challenge with cloud-based visualization is, can it stay current? Can it be in real time? And can it work for any supply chain, not just one kind of industry? And this was a project that we did over 3 years with MIT, and it showed that yes, if you take SAP information, if you take distribution information, if you take bills of materials, if you take finance data, and you combine it all from all these databases, you can automatically create a view of the supply chain. At least what you see on the right, you see the suppliers, a lot of suppliers, one factory, and then distribution. You can even see the shipping routes that the products take. You can see how much inventory you have of every raw material across the entire chain. And if you know where everyone is, and you know what inventory there is, and you know how long it takes to replace them, you can also calculate automatically how much risk is in every single piece of your supply chain. And that's what this 3-year project showed. Most companies have the data, but they don't have the tools to measure the risk in their supply chain. And this was a very simple system that took their data and put it in the cloud using a lot of web languages and web conventions to create these visualizations. And this data can be updated as often as needed. Okay, the first thing that we did was sustainability. Why is visualization important for sustainability? Well, before, your purchasing system was the place where you handled your vendors. And your distribution system is where you handled your distribution. And your transportation system is where you handle transportation. So you have these different databases. But if you want to measure sustainability, you need to see the end-to-end life cycle of a product. So life cycle assessment is the way you measure impact. And life cycle assessment needs to account for the carbon footprint of manufacturing, the carbon footprint of distribution, the carbon footprint of the use of the product. So every life cycle has to be in the same place. And you can't measure the distribution carbon footprint independently of the supplier carbon footprint because they all go together. And so some of the first companies that came to work with us said, well, we have an end-to-end supply chain. This is a footwear example, so it's a shoe. And you have suppliers in Asia putting together the shoe, sub-suppliers. Each one of them has a water footprint, carbon footprint, energy footprint, waste footprint. How is the company going to combine all that data together? Well, they need to put it on a network model of the entire supply chain. And so the first thing that we're able to do is visualize the life cycle impact of a product. So I think here you're seeing the carbon footprint. The carbon footprint in East Asia compared to Europe, compared to US. And you have from sourcing to retail on that map. And often the systems are different. The systems to track waste, systems to track water, energy, carbon are all different. So you need to combine them all in one place because sometimes you can reduce the carbon footprint, but you're increasing the water footprint. So visualization here was actually just the surface. What really was being achieved is all of these different databases were being combined, and the product impact was being visible holistically in the end-to-end. Well, this is obvious. So it's always going to be about social. We deal with a lot of big companies at my small company. And the advantage of a small company is that we can always talk to each other every day. I can call my CTO and ask him a question. I can call the CFO and ask him a question. In a big company, it took 3 years to map all of the SAP information into one visualization. Why? Well, it's not because of the math. The math is quite easy. It's because you have to find the organizations, the people across the supply chain. So even take a big CPG in the US, and it will take weeks to find the person who knows where the data is stored. In fact, in the end, some of the data we never found. We never found the addresses for about 30% of the suppliers. And that's inside of a company, inside of a big modern manufacturing company. What happens in a supply chain for a product like cotton, or coffee, or cocoa? There you have millions of farmers. Each of them makes very little money. They have no computers. They're all over the world. How are you going to communicate with them if you can't even communicate inside the company? Well, it's a social network idea. So a few years ago, a customer of ours from a chocolate company called Mars went to West Africa, where most of the cocoa in the world is produced. And she gave out her business card to everybody she met. And some of the people she met were farmers. But, you know, the farmers this is in Côte d'Ivoire, are very poor. And they make $1 or $2 a day. And she gets back to her office in the US, to Chicago, and she logs into Facebook, and she gets a message on Facebook from a cocoa farmer in West Africa. She thought, well, this is unusual. How did this farmer even find me on Facebook? Obviously, this person took a business card, found a computer, entered into Facebook, and sent her a message. And the farmer said, where is the fertilizer that you promised to deliver? We don't have fertilizer to grow the cocoa. So a light bulb went off in her head. Luckily, she went to MIT with me. So she called me and said, look, we need your social network. But we need it to connect the farmers to the company. Because we want to make sure that farmers have the training, the fertilizer, the services that they need to grow better cocoa. And so she brought us in, and for a year, we've been collecting real-time data using Android phones in Côte d'Ivoire about all of the aspects of the life of a cocoa farmer. And this project is really exciting because every morning I wake up, the managers in the company wake up, and you have a news feed just like on Facebook that says, so-and-so farmer logged in, and they reported this many sales, and they used this much fertilizer, and this is how much money they made. And now the company has a perfect visibility into what's right and what's wrong in the supply chain. This is one example where they're actually looking at schools and water and roads and healthcare in the village. Imagine that, going from just having a purchasing system one day to the next day having a real-time connection to people. And this is something, again, this is not visualization. Visualization makes this easy and universal for everyone to understand. The real power here is transforming the culture of the people inside the company. In the end, of course, I don't get to always make maps. So, while she wanted the real data from the farmers, I have to point out that when you're visualizing, there are some very exciting and sexy things you can do. these days with maps. Then there's some for me, very much less exciting, but much more useful things you can do with graphs and with PowerPoint and with Excel. And this is what ultimately the C-level executives actually care about. But all they want to know is, are we meeting our targets for all of these indicators? And this is, environmental, social, and productivity. So in the end, all of that data, all of those Android phones, all of that social networking, just comes down to a PowerPoint slide that says, good job, bad job. That's okay. Because when you have a system that goes from raw data collection all the way to management level decisions, all automatic, you've really transformed the way the company works. And now they can say, well, when we invest in schools, the productivity goes up. Or when we invest in healthcare, the income goes up. And they can see these relationships. They can do the same kinds of monitoring that they used to do with ERP, but they can do it now across the continent, across the class, and across different social and environmental problems. So this is really exciting. This is what keeps me going to work every day. Okay. The other exciting thing, you already saw examples of the same visualization used in different cases. So inventory management, sustainability, social programs. The advantage of visualization is it's completely universal. You don't have to know anything to understand a picture if the picture is drawn well. That's super powerful. We are based in New York City. This is a picture of Manhattan on October 30th, 2012. You see something? Is there a problem there? Any guess what happened? So that black part was flooded, right? It was covered in water. The whole part that's black. And some parts were flooded with 4 meters of water. One big wave came, Hurricane Sandy, in the middle of the night with a full moon, a perfect hurricane from the Caribbean, and flooded that whole part of Manhattan. And it flooded the subways, and it was salt water, so it destroyed a lot of the electronics and electronic equipment that keeps the city going. So imagine the financial center of the world was under 4 meters of water for just one night. And what happened later was even worse. They restored the power. They restored the subway after a few weeks, but that same salt water destroyed pumps that were used to transport fuel into the city. So gasoline, diesel, heating oil. The city of New York consumes 500,000 barrels of liquid fuel per day. Muscle memory. So 500,000 barrels a day is a lot of oil. You can't carry 500,000 barrels with trucks at all. It would take more trucks than there are in America to carry that many barrels. And the pipeline was broken, the pumps were broken, and it was going to take 2 weeks for the pumps to be replaced. So what do you do in a city that big with no fuel, so no cars can drive? Well, you panic. And that's what they did, they panicked. And they started making phone calls. And it took about 8 or 9 days to find a boat, a big boat, that could get filled up with the oil somewhere where the pumps were and transported into the city to feed right into the police and the emergency vehicle gas tanks. Okay, 9 days is a big, scary time period. And the city, as soon as this happened, they called us and said, okay, here's what we need. We need a map of where all the oil is in New York City. Because during the 8 days that there was no fuel, they had to call one gas station after another, one police station. They had to call everywhere that has fuel. How much fuel do you have? We need your fuel. And this means, this is what I mean by universal. To map the fuel in a city, you have to map every public sector agency, every private building, every pipeline, every boat terminal, every park, because all of them have some storage. Those are people that never talk to each other. We're talking about 2,000 different entities in one city. Together, they make the supply chain for fuel in New York City. To really know where to call, so you don't spend 2 weeks, but you spend 2 minutes, you just need an inventory. And the inventory can tell you exactly how much diesel, how much gas there is. But this is the kind of information that doesn't exist. You can imagine why, because everybody keeps their own information to themselves. So that was the first thing. We help them make this map. Now the beauty of this is it's on the web. Right? It's not a visualization, it's a social network. So you can invite gas station owners to register and keep their information. So it stays alive. The other exciting thing is you can send an alert to everybody, or you can send an alert to 10 people. Say the storm is coming, you have enough fuel. Please SMS if you don't. So it's pretty powerful as a communication tool. But the visualization is just the way to organize the data. And then what's the next step? Well, obviously the next step is preventing this catastrophic kind of event. When they got a boat full of fuel to deliver to the city, what happened? The ship tried to pass into a canal, and there was a lot of bridges. I think there's 200 bridges in New York. The bridge was broken. The motor that lifts it up and down was broken. So the barge couldn't deliver the fuel. So they lost another 2 days because of that bridge. So actually they needed not just the businesses, but also the infrastructure. It's the combination of the private and public that makes all of this work. No supply chain works without both. But nobody collaborates across these entities. And if you look at the supply chains for fuel in New York, you'll see bottlenecks. You'll see one point that many, many things have to pass through. If that point is broken, the fuel won't get into the depot. So we have 2 approaches for emergency management. One is collect all the data so that you have everyone's phone number in case anything happens. But while you do that, look at the infrastructure. Is it sufficient to keep running in an emergency? And that's exactly what they're going to do. Plan for risk and resiliency and respond faster to risk and resiliency. And again, anybody within the city can now use this information to make these decisions. And then maybe finally, for me, the most exciting part of visualization in the cloud is not the data that we know, but it's the data that we don't know. This is a little bit complicated for me to understand. We found that in SAP, a lot of companies have data. We found that if they give Android phones to farmers in Africa, they get more data. But how do they find out if a storm is hitting them, or if global climate change is going to affect them, or if a commodity is going to run out? And so we take advantage of the cloud, because we can use all the data they collect from their supply chain, and we can combine it with all sorts of data from the outside world as it's generated. Every year, there's more data. I think it was Marco who said more and more data is generated. And so you need a system that is not just made for today, but it's made for questions that you haven't asked yet. So, very simple example. We could take, this is a customer that manufactures a lot of cotton clothing. We can take all of those cotton farms and all of those cotton mills, and we can show right now what the risks are of different kinds of water-related issues. Right? If the cotton farm floods, it's destroyed. If there's a drought, it's destroyed. If the water is contaminated by too many chemicals, there's going to be a story in the press. How does a company with 2,000 suppliers know what the risk is? Very, very simple. As soon as you map them, which is the hard part, then we can run it through models, shapefiles they're called, basically to tell you farm by farm what the risk is and where you should focus your energy. In this case, I would move away from cotton entirely. Okay, the next thing you can do, obviously you guys all know, the news happens on the web before it happens anywhere else. If you have thousands of companies that you depend on to run your business, how will you sleep at night? Well, you have a system that tells you, oh, somebody has a flood, or somebody has a hurricane, or somebody has a tornado. You can read the news about everybody. You don't need to read the news about everybody. It's very easy, once you've mapped your supply chain, once you understand the importance of each one of your vendors, to understand, oh, this piece of news that just came in on the wire is located in the same place as the supplier, or the name matches the name of my supplier. And if the preferences are set, we will wake you up in the middle of the night. Or not. It's kind of like LinkedIn. You have to decide how many times a day you want us to email you. And for some companies, there's about 30 critical alerts every day. That's a lot. And then, this is the part that really gets me excited. So this is our first project in radical transparency. Data from the farms all the way to consumers, and it's happening in Brazil. And so you have the Android tablets being used, and they're being used to collect data from producers, and all these producers. Imagine traceability to places where there are barely roads. Right? So that's the beginning. I already explained that because we do the same thing in Africa. Okay, now, that traceability is very useful for supply chain managers. Right? So they can track every transaction and see exactly who is producing what products, when, what volumes, and how much they spent, the lead times, all of this regular logistics things. And that's great. We do that all the time for people. They even want to share this information with consumers, so when you scan the barcode on the product or you visit the website, you can see exactly where your Brazil nuts or your acai berries. But this is the part that gets me really excited. So now Google is flying satellites, basically every day over the Amazon. And every day they compare the leaves, the forest cover, with the day before. And so every day they can tell us how much deforestation is happening in every part of the Amazon, in real time. And so we can take that traceability supply chain, and we can compare it with new data about deforestation. And we can say to these people, look, yes, this supply chain is helping improve the forest, this supply chain is hurting, and it's damaging the forest. This is the kind of stuff that is light years away. So we've broken down the communication channels between the farmers and the consumers, and now we've got, for the first time, a real-time impact of deforestation. And so it's very easy to then certify certain growers versus other growers based on whether their practices are actually beneficial. And so we don't have to rely on audits. We can see right there with the satellite audit exactly what the impact of everything is. Okay, and for me that's almost the end. I'll tell you the first story about Sourcemap, which was, okay, so now we have these visualizations, but they're really meant to help many people work together on the same problem. My thesis at MIT was very, very nice. I went and worked for the Highlands of Scotland. You guys be familiar with Highlands of Scotland? They make the best whiskey in the world. It was a very hard thesis. I had to go visit every single whiskey distillery and beer brewery in the Highlands of Scotland to map their supply chains. It took a long time. And we ended up, we were working for the government, and we were trying to find opportunities, okay, for sharing data. And the opportunity was great, because when you get a lot of people to give you data, they always give you the answers. And well, this was this particular woman who owns a brewery, so they make beer, right in the middle of that map. So there's about 20 different beer breweries in this area. It's a very mountainous, very, very desolate area. And she said, well, my problem is I have a bottling plant. So she puts the beer, she makes the beer and then sends it to a bottling plant in England. Which is like 800 kilometers away, 700 kilometers away. And she says, I don't know, but I suspect that all of the other beer companies in the area also send their beer to the same bottling plant, because it's the only one nearby. I said, oh, that's interesting. So we went and asked everybody, and everybody else was using the same bottling plant. I said, well, that seems stupid, because we mapped it. And you have 20 companies, and they're sending the product 10,000 kilometers one way and 10,000 kilometers back just to get it to a bottle. But if you work alone as a company, all you can do is buy a more efficient truck. Maybe you can save 10% or 20%. But if you work together, the efficiencies are huge, right? Because the bottling plant is actually a very simple thing. It's too complicated for one company to make, but it's very easy for a government to fund. And so that's what we did. Basically, we took this map, which was a lot of work because we had to get everybody to share their data. We said, look, to the government, all of these breweries are doing this. And back then it was 2009, so we used carbon. So we said, look, one-way shipment, 4 tons of carbon. Okay? And if you took that bottling plant and you invested in a new one, somewhere in the middle of the area, you would save X amount. And then we could just show, oh, from 4 tons we went to 1.4 tons. So we could reduce by 70% the footprint, but also the time, also the cost of transportation. Also then, who knows, maybe all these businesses would save money and then be more competitive, and then the whole region would be more competitive, the whole industry. And that's what they did. They invested a little bit of money. I think it was £200,000. They gave a loan to this owner of this brewery. She built a bottling plant. So very simple idea, very powerful. And happy to say that the pharmaceutical industry now, the CPG industry, the electronics industry, the clothing industry, now they're all starting initiatives in this direction in the US. Why? Why would they share data? Well, first of all, transparency and visibility, that's really in the future, right? We are in a post-transparent world. But second of all, they found arguments, they found ways to make money by sharing information about their supply chain. So the breweries in Scotland found a way to make money because they were going to spend less on fuel. These companies, these are big companies, and why are they saving money? They're saving money because, for example, we'll do the first one. This is not very famous, but it's very big. It's all of the pharmaceutical companies in America joining together to share information about their supply chain. Why would they do that? Well, for one thing, pharmaceutical companies are big value add. So they buy very simple chemicals and they make very expensive drugs. So actually the chemicals are not a very important thing. Next, they all buy from the same company. There's only a few suppliers of chemicals. So they all pretty much thought they knew. The problem is there are maybe 20,000 suppliers of chemicals. Each pharmaceutical company can only afford to audit 200 a year. But if they combine the list into one big list, then they can each do 200, but they can cover all 20,000, as opposed to each one of them probably doing the same 200 every year. And that's the same. That's exactly what the Sustainability Consortium does. Fair Factory, Sustainable Apparel. This one was started by Biotech, Walmart. This one was really sponsored a lot by Intel, and this one is Nike. So these are spearheaded by the biggest players in the industry. And now the cocoa industry, the palm oil industry are all doing the same thing. Sharing data to save money on auditing, to increase the quality, and to reduce the risk of their supply chain. So, sharing is the future. And then this is my thesis, right? Visualization is not a reflection of how you do business, it's a transformation in how you do business. And this will be my last little story. We work with IKEA, the big furniture manufacturer. Actually, they're a retailer. And IKEA has a really, really advanced sort of sustainability program. So they need to collect information from everybody. In fact, we work with a part of IKEA that only prints the catalogs. And it's the biggest book publisher in the world, just the IKEA catalog. And so they collect all this information from everybody. And then one year they said, well, we also have a lot of mobile apps. And sometimes people use a mobile app, sometimes they use a paper catalog. And so we should have the footprint of the catalog and also the footprint of the app. And so they started working with us, and they basically said, okay, we need to have the footprint of a mobile app. Nobody's ever measured the footprint of a mobile app before. It's a very strange thing. Why? Because you have the telecommunication company, you have the server company, Amazon, Google, Apple, you have the web designer, you have the content producer. So actually there's a supply chain even for digital products, and it's never been mapped before. And of course, because it's never been done, we had to be inventive. And so this Mathieu is actually our connection at IKEA. And so he just started tweeting. To the representatives of the different companies. So Amazon, can you tell us who we can talk to about your footprint? And Google and Apple. And so actually using Twitter now to trace the supply chain to make it more efficient. And so I think if anything, that points the way towards a future where everything's in the cloud, but it's not just in the cloud, it's actually in social media. And we're finding business cases for sharing data, and the Trojan horse that brings it all together, that makes it all possible, is visualization. Voilà.